In this video, I'm going to show you three different methods for saving and sharing a Google Colab notebook in case you need to submit it for an assignment, share it with colleagues, etc. So the first method I'm going to show is probably the easiest, most straightforward method, but it also has some limitations, especially if you're submitting for an assignment. So the first method is to just use the share button that is provided with all Google Suite docs. So when you click that share button, you have these options down here for giving people access to your Colab notebook. If you were submitting it for an assignment, I'd recommend that you select anyone with the link and make the instructor or the person you're submitting it just a viewer of the document so that they cannot edit it. If you're working with a colleague on a co-authored project or something like that, then you may want to make them an editor. But for assignments, we'd typically just keep the person as a viewer. And then from there, you can copy the link to your notebook and share it with your instructor or whoever you need to share it with. So here I'm going to open that link up in an incognito window. So you can see the notebook pops right up. I'm not signed into any particular Google account. And as an instructor, if a student submitted work to me in this format, the first thing I would do is click this Run All button. They want me to sign in to run everything in the notebook. So let me just reopen this not in an incognito window. So yeah, the first thing I would do is click Run All just to kind of be able to see all the different cell output that's supposed to pop up in that student's Colab notebook. So that would be method number one, is using the big share button. Method number two is going to be to print the notebook as a PDF. So to do that, you can click this File button in your Colab notebook, Print down here, and then most computers should have an option to save something as a PDF or print it as a PDF. And from there, you will have a PDF version of your Google Colab notebook. It's a little messy, but it works. It does the job. Here is how the notebook appears. One important thing I want you to notice is that when you create a PDF version of your notebook, it is not interactive, so your instructor would not be able to go and run these cells. And the way this notebook appears right now, the output of the code cells is not present. So this might be a problem if you want that output to be showing up. So one thing you should be careful about when you're using the PDF way of saving and submitting your notebook is you should be careful that you have run all the cells that you want to run. So I'm actually going to click Run All here. Now I have output appearing, and let's go back again to File Print. And this time my output appears at the bottom there. And you can see there's sometimes some formatting issues with this save to PDF uh, process. So it's probably not my top recommendation, but it is the way to get a PDF, the easy way to get a PDF file if that's what you want to submit. So once your notebook appears how you want it to appear, you can just click Save. And then from there, you're just putting this PDF file wherever you want to put it on your computer and then submitting it to your instructor as a PDF. All right, the third and last method I'm going to show is probably my most recommended method for saving a Google Colab notebook, but it is also the most complicated. So take note of the steps here because there are several. Let me start by clearing the output so that we don't see output anymore for the code. So for this last method, you're actually going to use a little code snippet to convert your notebook into an HTML file. So the final output of this last method will be an HTML file. Here's the code snippet you want to use. I'm going to paste it into a new cell down here. So it says %% shell, and then on a new line, Jupyter NB convert dash dash to HTML, and then a file path. So Before we run this, we have to go through a few little steps. So the first step we need to do is make sure that the notebook appears the way we want it to appear. So if I want the output of this cell to appear in my final HTML file, I need to go ahead and run that cell. I'll leave this one without output so that you can see the difference as we go through the process. Once I have the notebook appearing the way I want it to appear, I'm then going to do File, Download, and then I want to download it as a .ipynb, which is a Python notebook. So I'll click that. It will download. And then from there, I'm going to click this File button here on the left. I'm going to click this Upload button. And I'm going to select the ipynb file that I just downloaded. And that's going to bring that file into my session here. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the path of that file. So to do that, you can right-click, or you may need to Control or Command click on a Mac computer, and click this copy path, and then paste that path here in your cell. And then once you have that path pasted there, you can run this little cell. And I think I'm going to have to put this path in quotation marks because there are some spaces in it. All right, so it goes through the conversion process and it creates a file called example HTML. It pops up right here. If it doesn't pop up, you can click this refresh button to get it to pop up. And then the last step is going to be to download this HTML file. So you can click these three dots and click download. And now I actually have an HTML file. This is the one I just did. That contains my notebook. And if I open that, I can open it in any software that can interpret HTML files. So let's do Firefox for now. Here's my HTML version of my notebook. You can see that because I ran this cell and had the output displayed, it displayed that output. Because I did not run this cell, it didn't display that output. So you want to be careful about which ones you want showing up versus not. If I wanted this one showing up, I would need to go back and repeat the process after running this cell. But this is an HTML version of my notebook. I can then submit that HTML file to my instructor. So that's 3 different ways to share your notebooks. Hopefully this is useful, and feel free to reach out if any questions come up.